He terrorized, but he wasn't a terrorist. Explain that one. Not quite sure how we get to draw that conclusion. So in spite of the fact that he actually killed 3 RCMP officers, and I think, you know, especially when we think internationally, but even at home, you know, there are few more, I think, resonant images and symbols of Canada than the RCMP, than there are old Mounties. So the fact that that wasn't seen as a strike at the core of our values, but rather just a Canadian city under siege is also quite puzzling. So even in those cities where we knew there was a presence, where everyone else in the community was saying, yeah, we've got this group, we've got that group, there are this many members, that they were engaged in this sort of activity. So there are a couple of communities in Western Ontario, for example, that were like that. Law enforcement would say, no, that's not our problem. Maybe the community next door, maybe the city next door, but not us, we don't have that here. And so if law enforcement aren't aware or are denying the presence, they're not responding in a way that deters or stalls these groups. So in fact, they're enabling in that respect. It sends a message of, you know, that, again, that permission to hate, just as the political rhetoric does. There's a lot of emphasis now, if you, you know, if you read media reports, for example, and even read the scholarship, there's a really strong emphasis right now on the role of the internet, the role of social media. But I think that is to discount the extent of sort of face-to-face recruitment that still occurs. It's still the case that people are often drawn in initially by people that they know. Sometimes family members, sometimes, you know, friends or classmates, because often they are quite young people, high school or university and college age. And sometimes it's more random than that. They meet someone in a bar and, you know, start sharing their problems and their troubles and their woes and their, you know, lack of status and stature in the community. So right now we're seeing a real emphasis on something more like cultural nationalism as opposed to more old-fashioned, perhaps, racialist nationalism grounded in race only and, you know, the preservation of the white race. It's much broader than that now and focusing as much on culture and Canadian values as it is on racial purity. So there's been some transition over time. I also like to think of these groups as sort of indiscriminate discriminators. That is, that the targets of their hostility are quite wide-ranging. Essentially anyone who deviates from the norm as they define it, as they understand it, in terms of race, gender, sexuality, religion, you know, most of those core aspects of identity that you can imagine. And so they're not afraid to use both offensive and defensive positioning to do their duty as they see it. That is to preserve themselves, preserve their neighborhoods, their communities, and preserve their country from all of these threats that they have identified in an attempt to preserve their heritage and their homeland, or even just their cultural ethos.